Welcome to Edge of the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Mike Ricksecker. With me, as always, is Vanessa Hogle, our fantastic co-hostess. And down in the chat room, the lovely chat Shananigator, Shana, bringing you a fantastic episode. We have a great guy with us this evening. Been in the field a long time, lots and lots of experience. Dale Kaczmarek of the Ghost Research Society. He's been doing this for over 40 years, and he has seen this field evolve. Really looking forward to chatting with him and picking his brain. So do want to throw out there real quick, just before we went live, BD Flint had a $10 super chat. She had to take off for the evening, so we do appreciate that, BD. I'm sorry that we'll mess you. So all right, well, let's get right into it. Dale, welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the being on the show, and nice looking forward to meeting you all in person at the Mineral Springs meet and greet down there, the Haunted Road Media, I guess they call it.
Yeah, the Haunted Road Media Paracon. So you're going to be speaking there, and we can actually, talk a little bit this evening about what you're going to be speaking on. So let's kind of dive right into it. You've been doing this a long time, and like I said, you've seen the field evolve, and I just would really be interested. I mean, shoot, you've been doing this since I was 1 year old.
Don't do that to him.
No, I'm not. No, it's. I'm doing it more as in.
I know
Dale's got a ton of experience here. So, yeah. So how have things changed over the years?
Oh, quite a bit. I mean, when I started when I started the group, basically back in 1977, I was actually involved back about 2 years prior to that, about 1975, got into a serious research. We started kind of a loosely associated group with a bunch of like-minded people that really had an interest in the paranormal, and we just kind of hung together. Basically, that's how the group just got started. And then about a couple of years later, we decided to form what was then called the Ghost Trackers Club, and in 1977. And I was the research assistant. I was the co-founder, but a research assistant. Martin V. Ricardo, my good buddy, helped found the group back in 1977. And then I worked for about 5 years as a research assistant before we decided to change the name to Ghost Research Society. And at that point, he told me that I had total control of the group and take it any direction I wanted to go at that point. So from about 1982 on, it's been known as the Ghost Research Society. And we've traveled all across the country, all different various states. I've been to England and Wales twice, in 1985 and 1987. Had just a barrel of fun there. Just a very interesting place out there in England. And what our main emphasis is, obviously, is the research investigations of ghost hauntings and poltergeist phenomena, with an emphasis on the scientific, more or less going into scientific equipment. We do have people in our group that I will say are intuitive, not full-blown psychics, but basically they can pick up and maybe sense things. But I've always been kind of a research, scientific minded person. I got straight A's in high school and all the science courses I ever took. So it's just kind of like kind of fell into place later on when I decided to make this kind of a hobby. That's really all it was at first, was a hobby. Just getting into it was really my way of just finding out if there was life after death. That was how I got involved. I figured, well, if you can prove the existence of ghosts, you can prove the existence of life after death. And that's what was my main concern getting in, or my main thing to do, I guess you might call it. I mean, we all have our religious views on what lies beyond death's door, and I'm sure that most people believe that there is something beyond what we do here on Earth, and sometimes people hang around for a bit. They become earthbound. They might just drop in to see what's going on, and that's what we wanted to get involved with, actually researching and investigating, was places where people had experiences. So I started very early, starting even before the World Wide Web was out, getting involved with what they used to call BBSs, remember?
Right,
Bulletin Board
remember
Services.
those. Yep.
They were just basically modified chat rooms, no fancy anything. And then opening up a P.O. box and just having people send me what they call snail mail back then. And tons of letters would pour in and so forth. And of course, later on, technology caught up. You got the World Wide Web, and then, eventually the equipment caught up, because even back in the 1970s, when I first started out, my entire suitcase full of paranormal equipment included a cassette tape recorder, a 35 millimeter camera, and a compass. That was my EMF meter. Basically a compass will point to true magnetic north unless it comes in contact with a strong magnetic field. So later on, down the line, there were different types of equipment that you could kind of adapt to the purpose of ghost hunting. And now I think it's even more refreshing now that there are people out there, very, very intelligent, very sophisticated minds that are developing equipment specifically for the purpose of ghost hunting. And that's something that I never thought I would see, but eventually it did transpire.
Yeah, it's been really, really interesting. Even just the short time that I've been involved, which is about half the time as you. So I do have to throw out there, we are simulcasting on Beyond the Light network. So thank you, Chuck Banks, for setting us up on Spreaker there, and also down in Periscope. So the first question from the chat room, you've kind of already touched on this, what got you interested in ghost research. And you mentioned learning more about the afterlife. And you were talking before the show that you've performed, or you investigated 4,100 different locations. So with all those investigations under your belt, have you discovered some of those answers?
Well, obviously, when I first started out, it was, and this is what I always tell people when they're getting involved with the paranormal, you got to be very persistent. You got to have patience, perseverance, because you're not going to go out the very first time and see a ghost. I mean, you could. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you could, but I mean, you probably won't. And typically, it took me about 15 years before I saw my first ghost. Before I had some, what I would call evidence towards the existence of something that survived the death's door. And so I guess my way of getting into the paranormal was not only to prove the existence of life after death, but also to actually come back with some evidence that we could collect at investigations, whether it be private homes, public places, or anything in between, of video, audio, personal experiences, equipment fluctuations, photographs, things that I could produce and say, well, here's our evidence for what we've collected at a site. And again, not trying to convince anybody one way or the other, because sometimes you do have skeptical people that, you could show them anything and they're not going to believe it until something comes over and bites them there, where. So it's... It was just kind of my way of just producing this evidence and just throwing out to the public, and eventually having a website to do that. Before that, it was just doing a series of presentations and lectures and workshops and conferences and so forth to kind of get the word out what we're doing. So it's an area that I'm going to be around for a while, I think.
Now, Dale, let me ask you, just because you brought this up, you said it was 15 years before you had what you would consider solid evidence, or being able to see a spirit or communicate with a spirit in whatever form it was that you did it. That takes an immense amount of dedication, an immense amount of patience to go that long before you have that type of evidence. What advice would you give people just starting out? I mean, just the nitty-gritty, down and dirty, no holds barred, this is what you need to do or get out type of advice when it comes to this field?
Well, you got to remember, go back now to the point where I first started off. My collection protocols and the way I would collected evidence back then is nothing like it is today. You don't have the equipment we had today than we had back then. Basically, you didn't have digital cameras that showed you an instant photograph. You had film that you had to take and develop. You didn't know if you got anything on the film until you got that film developed. So it took a while. I mean, basically, without any equipment, you're basically running blind. You're really just going to a location. You don't have anything to tell you that there's something here. There's an electromagnetic disturbance here. There's a cold spot here, unless you feel it yourself. So maybe that's part of the reason it took me so long to see a ghost or come across some evidence. Today, it's much easier to do that. So I would always tell people, especially if you're getting involved with the paranormal, and I've seen this over and over again, is that a lot of times people will jump in with both feet. You know, they'll simply, that it's so easy now to buy a couple of pieces of equipment, get a website, get something on Facebook, and voila, you're a ghost hunter. And I've always said, like, I worked for 5 years before I became president of the group. So I kind of took a back seat, learned what I could, and learned from other people in the field. And I always tell people to do the same. Join a group, a very experienced group that has somebody that you trust a lot, that's been around for a while, not necessarily an expert, because I don't believe there aren't any experts. I just basically say people that have more whiskers, so to speak, and join that group, hang with them, investigate with them, and then decide maybe later on down the line if you want to start your own group. Then you can kind of branch off. At that time, you'll have some experience, a bit of expertise perhaps, and know the ins and outs of ghost hunting.
Well, and I want to bring up something real quick, and then we're going to go back to Mike. Something Mike and I have never even talked about on this show.
Oh.
I used to develop film for a living. And when you say, when you don't have the digital like we do today, so you don't know if you've caught something right off the bat, I can speak from 100% personal experience that when we would find something decades ago, because I'm 46, so I was doing this a long time ago, developing film. When we would find something that looked wrong on a film or something, we automatically assumed it was a malfunction on the film or the camera, and it would get tossed. So it makes me wonder, during those times before digital photography, how many captures were actually caught on film that ended up in the wastebasket of the film developing company.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thing I enjoyed most often with shooting film cameras over digital cameras. Now there are pluses and minuses to both aspects. Obviously, the digital technology, you get that instant picture, but you don't have a negative to hold on to. It's just simply a digital file. The opposite, you have a 35 millimeter camera that you don't see instantly what you get, but then if you do get something, it's imprinted on a negative. It's something you can hold in your hand. You could show it to somebody. Now, a negative cannot be manipulated, as you know. You can take a print, obviously, scan it in, and then play with it or something. But if you always go back to the original negative, there it is. It's on the negative. And that's what I always liked about that. It was a physical piece of evidence that you could hold in your hand, and not a bunch of ones and zeros from a digital file and say, well, here's my evidence. So a lot of times what we use black and white high-speed infrared film. We used to use color Ektachrome infrared film, and we got some amazing results in an area about between 600 and 900 nanometers in wavelength. A nanometer is about a billionth of a meter, so it's a very narrow band of infrared light, which is invisible to the naked eye, mostly heat, and things would show up, images, shadow figures, and all kind of weirdness, basically, during my early experimentation with that film back in the mid-1970s. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to find that film nowadays.
And is there any way to replicate that with the modern technology with the digital camera?
Well, you have some cameras. You have some things like flare cameras, which basically use heat, basically heat-seeking or heat detection. You also have some full spectrum cameras that kind of get into both the IR and the UV, because it's basically what they call full spectrum, so it basically gets into those aspects. You can use certain film today, which I believe is still available, that's professional photographers use. I used to use it as the control film back. They used to call them Tri-X film, 35 millimeter Tri-X black and white film, which I use as a control. And that has always been, if you look at the statistics for that particular film, and the wavelength. It's very sensitive to the UV, the ultraviolet, and again another area of light that's kind of invisible to the naked eye. There's not a lot of things, unfortunately, that really get into the IR spectrum. I mean, true IR. Even the night shot cameras of today, and even some of the full spectrums, are what I would call near IR. Basically, you can actually see, if you look at an IR illuminator, you can see the red glow coming off of it. So obviously IR light is invisible. That's more closer to the red than it is to the IR. It still illuminates in night shot, but it's called near IR. So it's really hard to replicate it with current technology, unfortunately.
Interesting.
That makes a lot of sense.
I did need to throw out there that we have a $10 super chat from Tom McNicholas, so I want to thank you, Tom, for that. Absolutely. These two questions here kind of go hand in hand. They are from our Mad Hatters down there in the chat room. So Dawn Spooky asks, what did your friends and family think of what you were doing way back when you started? And from Betty and Wayne, did people want you to be investigating at first?
Well, when I first started out, obviously, I got my start in the Army back in 72 to 74 when I was in the Army, and I was a chaplain's assistant. So basically, here's your very early exposure, because I was raised a Catholic to begin with, but here's your real early exposure to priests and talking to priests, and that's where the beginnings of my real interest in ghosts actually came from, believe it or not, because I would sit there and chat with these priests for a long time because they were right there in the chapel with me. But a lot of times when I was growing up, when I say growing up, in my 20s and so forth, people would kind of, for the most part, they knew I was very serious about it. But at the same time, because lack of evidence and lack of what was resources and equipment, you really couldn't prove that anything existed. That it was always a matter of faith that we proceed beyond death. So that was my way of getting involved. But a lot of people, again, just kind of went along with me. Even my wife, when I got married, I've been married now for 26 years, going on 27, and she used to go with me to a number of different locations, and a couple places she got a little freaked out at because it was kind of creepy. But I forget what the other question was. I'm sorry. It was.
Did people want you to be investigating at first? Like I said, they kind of tie in together. Yeah. Basically, I mean, it's just a kind of a hobby I've always had. I mean, I get this from my parents. A lot of people ask me, well, how do I get involved with ghost hunting? Or ghost. I don't like the term ghost hunting because it actually implies that you're out there with a gun and you're actually hunting ghosts. I like to say ghost researcher, paranormal investigator, or something. But so if it slips for me, just kind of slap me or something. But my parents actually told me ghost stories when I was growing up. My grandparents and my parents told me ghost stories as a youngster. My mom and dad, when they were dating back in the late 1930s, early 1940s, just about the beginning of World War II, my dad basically was like myself. He was very interested in ghosts. In fact, it was a story here in Chicago. You might be familiar with a very famous hitchhiking ghost story called Resurrection Mary. Yep.
She's been seen ever since the latter 1930s, hitchhikes along Archer Avenue. And in the very first stories began to circulate in the late 1930s. So my mom and dad, when they would go out on a date, my dad would take my mom to a dinner, a movie, a theater, dancing, whatever. Always on the way home, it was a Saturday night routine that you ride around the cemetery in the middle of the night looking for their ghost. Much to the chagrin of my mom, who absolutely was terrified. I didn't want anything to do with this. Didn't want to see a ghost. And would often beat up on my dad-to-be, I guess you'd call him. I'd say, take me home. I've had enough of this. So, I mean, I never saw anything. But it was my dad going beyond not just believing the story, but wanting to see for himself. And that's where basically how I got involved. Later on, looking at these stories, hearing these tales, and then trying to, in later life, prove that they were real, urban legends, old wives' tales, or some sort of other mystery.
I'm going to be in Chicago in September. I might have to check that out.
Well, our friend Tom McNicholas used to live right down the street from there, so he's very familiar with Archer Ave. Yeah,
absolutely.
Wow.
So I did want to ask you, Dale, because I got to talk about Bachelor's Grove, because from my understanding, that famous photograph was taken during one of your investigations.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So I'm gonna pop the photo up here for the Mad Hatters. So what's the story behind this photo?
Well, this photograph and this investigation was on August the 10th of 1991. We were out there with a group of my people doing an investigation at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery during the middle of the afternoon. It's if you know the area, it's one area that you're not really supposed to be out there at night. We've gotten permission there in the past. It's been very expensive. So we were out there, and the idea was we gave everybody a map of the location and told them to go through in pairs of two. One person was looking at the map. The other person was, and also jotting it down what was going on. The other person was going through with equipment, cameras, their own feelings, and jotting down whatever they felt. And as they went through the whole cemetery, we basically had maps with kind of transparencies or marking with grease pencils, kind of old-fashioned school. And then we took those transparencies and we laid them over the map, and we kind of saw how everybody was marking different locations where they experienced something. And a number of people marked this checkerboard tombstone that you can see that lady sitting on right now. It basically has no name. It's just part of the base of what used to be a pedestal on top. A number of people felt something unusual there, and a couple of other places. And we went back to those locations and we tried other experiments, including one of my members had suggested or had asked me about shooting infrared film that afternoon. And I told her how to go about doing it, and the safeguards and precautions, because it's got to be very, very, it's a very sensitive film. She had black and white infrared film, high speed, and she took, this is a blow up of the original. I mean, I think on my site, if it's not up there already, it's going to be up there pretty soon. I have the original. I've had it for years. I just never had a chance to actually show the original that often. But this is the cropped version of it. When she got the original photograph, it was all the way in the far left-hand corner, and she actually said she didn't even see it at first because it was so small. It wasn't until maybe weeks later or months later that she saw something there, and she blew it up. And there's a woman sitting on the tombstone, a long dress down her ankles, with long kind of brown hair or something like that, brownish hair, kind of staring out in profile. Now, if you look very carefully at this image, part of her head and part of her knee, believe it would be her left knee, you can actually see through. It's semi-transparent, indicating she's not really there. Now, nobody was dressed like that in our group, obviously. This was in the middle of August. We were all there in shorts, blue jeans, and had T-shirts on. Nobody was dressed in a gown. We didn't stage this. I took a lot of heat from this photograph for many years. In fact, it was in the Chicago Sun-Times, Chicago Tribune, a Discovery Channel documentary called Phantom Photographs that I appeared on. But even people believed that it was fake. In fact, one person even said that, or a number of people said it was my wife sitting down there. It doesn't even look anything like my wife. So it's one of these once in a lifetime photographs that you'll capture something that looks like we do. A lot of images are not that solid or that definitive. Sometimes they're shadows, sometimes they're semi-transparent forms, or fogs, or mist, or they're different ways that ghosts can materialize. But to get something in a form like this is really amazing. And it was scrutinized by a number of people. In fact, on that documentary, Len Zapruder, who was supposedly an expert from Kodak, looked at that film, looked at that picture and said, it's most likely a real person because it's casting a shadow. Well, if you look at this photograph, if you look at it very carefully, that entire person and the tombstone are already in the shadows. You can see the shadow line right next to the very bright area of light.
Right. Okay.
So basically, if you're already in the shadow, you can't cast a shadow. It's just impossible. And he missed that one. Unfortunately, I never had a chance to rebuck his rebuck in my photograph. But it stood the test of time. I mean, people have it all over on their different websites. Some people claim it's real. Some people still don't believe it's real. I actually found it in the Ghost app one day. that somebody had used without permission.
Oh wow!
So it's kind of gotten all over the world, and it's one of those things that, again, if you would have had a digital, would have showed them on digital. We don't know. I mean, maybe it was just because it was an infrared film that we were using, an area of light that's invisible to the naked eye. That's the difference between using film cameras rather than digital cameras.
But I'm going to tell you something funny, Dale. I did a show with Noreen Sampierbalovich on ghost images, and I want to say that somebody submitted this image, and I'm pretty astute at being able to spot whether one's fake or not, just because I'm intuitive as well. This one stumped the hell out of me, and I told her, I said, I don't know. Because I'll admit all day long if I have no idea, and I said, I honestly don't know. And it's so unbelievably interesting to meet the person that was there when this was taken. I mean, I'm fascinated. I consider this an honor because your photo stumped the hell out of me.
Well, that photograph, I mean, given all credit where credit is due, that was actually taken by Jude Huff Fells, and her last name now is Vondersmith, and she lives out in Georgia. Maybe she's listening in because she's on my Facebook Friends GRS page, and this was posted on there, so maybe she's also tuning in and listening.
Well,
but
congrats to her because she stumped me, and I'm hard to stump. I'm hard to stump.
About 25, almost 30 years ago, I decided to start, giving everybody a free service by analyzing photographs, and giving my opinion. Yeah. And that's one thing. If you go to my website, especially my Spirit Photography page, at the very bottom it says, if you submit photographs, to me to look at, submit them with all the information you can, type of film, if it's a film camera, circumstances, why you were taking the picture, et cetera, et cetera. And then remember at the very end, if you don't hear what you want to hear, remember it's only my opinion, and you did ask for my opinion. Don't get upset.
That's exactly what I said on the show. That's exactly what I said on the show, because on another photo, somebody got really angry at me, and I'm like, it's just my opinion.
It's an opinion.
Exactly.
That take away your experience. I have one I'm going to send you, taken at the Crescent Inn Hotel by myself in the hallway, taken out of the third-story window around midnight, and there is a young woman leaning against a non-existent wall staring at me.
That I'd like to see.
And it's a full-body apparition. 100% full body. Mike's seen it. There is no explanation. My niece and my son were in the room with my mother 2 floors down, or a floor down. I was totally by myself outside of the bridal suite, which was in that hotel, the original rooms of when it was a hospital where they sent the people that were dying, because it was the only rooms that had thick doors to block out the screams. The rest of the rooms had all of the doors taken off because it was a cancer research hospital.
Gotcha.
It was fake. So yeah, don't have a clue. I was 100% by myself. Wall behind me, window in front of me.
And that's good, especially when I ask people to send me all the circumstances behind their picture taking process. Sometimes they were just taken a few days ago. Sometimes they were taken decades ago. They don't remember the type of film or the camera, so they try to fill in the best they can. Again, I'm not always right. I'll say just like anybody. I'm infallible. I make mistakes. I may, but I've seen so many photographs. I mean, if I was to give just a kind of a reasonable how many photographs I've seen in 30 years, probably 8,000 or 10,000 photographs. Seriously, I mean, I get an average of 3 to 4 photographs a day, every single day of the week to look at. That people send me all over from Facebook to my GRS page and so forth. And again, I just tell people. Some stump me. I mean, some literally stump me, and I have no idea. And if I have no idea, I'll simply say, I don't try to fake it. I just I don't have the slightest idea how they got out of the film.
That's exactly what I did.
But there are some that I can see. I can look at immediately within about 2 minutes and say, well, that's a reflection, that's a camera strap, that's an orb, that's something different, or it might be what they call today pareidolia or matrixing or things of that nature, or just sometimes very explainable phenomena. Like you might go in the middle of the winter and take a photograph outside and you see a fog out there. Well, it's probably your breath because you just exhaled and the camera snapped the picture and illuminated the fogs. I mean, there's telltale signs that you look for in photographs.
Okay, back me up on this and tell me I'm not crazy, but I am so tired of people posting pictures that as a smoker of over 20 years, no more, now I do my vape, now I'm a vapor, but as a smoker of over 20 years, I know for a fucking fact that is cigarette smoke.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of people posting that and saying, check this out, look at the spirit I caught. I'm like, dude, you just exhaled.
Yeah. Now they're making bigger ones with all the vape.
Exactly. Right. Or it's the snake of the smoke off the end of your cigarette. When it literally looks like it's coming out of the camera, that is, I'm sorry, that is a no holds barred. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I'm pretty sure your picture's fake.
Right.
Kind of read.
Well, when I started looking at photographs, I wanted to not only just give my opinion, but then somebody said, well, that's not what you're wrong. Well, what I started to do was I started to assemble a major database of photographs from digital flaws to orbs, to camera straps, to cigarette smoke, to double exposure, to reflections, to some matrixing, pareidolia, all this, and I got them in file folders on my 2 terabyte external hard drive, and it's nearly
Nice.
filled, but it's a lot in there. So if somebody comes up with a picture, I'll say, well, look, here's a very similar one that was taken in similar circumstances. The same thing happened. Or what I'll get with really kind of, I'll tell people sometimes, go to my website before you send the photograph and look. I got 2 sections of my website. If you haven't already been there, ghostresearch.org. I have one side that has what I believe to be legitimate photographs, and the other side, photographs that have natural explanations. Go to the side that's naturally explainable and see if you can find something that looks similar to what you just took yourself before you send it out to me. Because a lot of times you might be able to debunk your own photograph. I've actually had photographs of people sent me that they got cigarettes in their hands or cigarettes in the ashtray burning in the room, and said, look, the strange fog I just captured. I said, well, What's that burning in the ashtray right there? It's
is it called Marlboro? What is it? I was in England, and I had an orb, which I'm not. I know what's dust, I know what's mist, and stuff, and I'll debunk my own shit all day long. But Mike's seen the photos; he's seen the originals. We had orbs that followed us, and they were caught on camera phones, 35 millimeter professional cameras, everything. But they followed us, and they were always in a different frame. We caught one from over 500 feet away on the beach in Whitby, England, that looked like it was the size of a beach ball.
Mm.
Yeah,
we do have a question out there from Real Paranormal Activity, the podcast, and what your opinion is on orbs, Dale.
Well, again, when the digital technology came out, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was somewhere in the 1960s or so. It might have been a little bit earlier than that. NASA was the first one to use digital photography and so forth. During even though it was in its infancy back then. If you look at the grainy images taken off the moon in 1969, surely they weren't digital, but they were better than average. When you started to switch to digital technology, there seemed to be a problem. Kodak will never admit to this. You'll go to the Kodak website, and you'll see beautiful pictures of digital images. You'll never see an orb on any of their pictures, and there's a reason for that, because usually they don't take them under low light conditions. Now, when you take pictures, a lot of people, when they go out investigating, which I don't really consider investigating, when you go to a cemetery and just snap a bunch of pictures, to me that's not investigating. That's to go in the middle of the night snapping pictures in a dark cemetery. But anyway, when you snap pictures with a digital camera out there in the dark, there's a focusing beam that's sends a light out and it's trying to focus on something. So as you're looking through the viewfinder or even through the LCD screen, you'll see the camera going trying to focus on it, and eventually it just snaps the picture. Some cases you might get what's called a digital flaw, an area of the film that Kodak will never explain this, but it's been explained by a number of people, that these are areas where the pixels don't fill in properly. They leave a little kind of void, if you will. They haven't filled in. They're like little white, perfectly round little circles, and we call them orbs. Now, the other explanations can be dust particles, fibrous material in the air. It can be, if you don't believe me, shake a rag in front of your camera and snap a picture. And see
yeah.
If you go out in the middle of the night and it's a very humid day, you might see water droplets in the air. You can literally photograph water droplets, and we've experimented and we've gotten this. Go out in the middle of a forest preserve during the summertime. At night, snap some pictures. You'll see bugs, gnats, mosquitoes. They look like orbs too. My opinion is probably about 95% or more of the orbs that people capture are probably explainable. There are some. I won't say that all orbs are not are explainable, but most of the ones that I've seen have natural explanations for them. Now, if you see the orb and you photograph it, well, that's a different story. I mean, I've actually had pictures that people have shown me that shows that the orb is twinkling, changing luminosity, and for them to explain that this is the dust particle, kind of tumbling over and over and illuminating as it's going down, I don't buy that. I've actually seen some that actually have illuminated areas in the environment that have left behind a visible light in the room. Now, when you got something like that, then you got to scratch your head and say, well, what the hell was that I just filmed, or what I just saw?
Okay.
Yeah, we've had some like that. We've had some that were. I've had one that actually had like 4 or 5 different colors in it, lit from within, and it had things coming down from it that I didn't know what else to call them. I just called them little spermies.
Yeah.
Because they look like little sperm.
Well, see, the thing with some people get a bit carried away sometimes with some of their photographs. I mean, you can go to a lot of websites, unfortunately, and if anyone's listening, I mean, I'm not downing your website. I'll never do that. But I mean, you really got to look into stuff that you put on your website before you put it up there, because it makes you look amateurish if you put something up there that's very readily debunkable, like orbs. I've actually had people say, well, I got a red orb. That means that orb is angry. I got a green orb. He's jealous. I got a blue orb. It means he's whatever. I mean, they're different colors. And I go, no, that to me, it doesn't make any sense what color the orbs are. But I mean, I've had people try to explain that to me in the past, and it's just one area that there's too many natural explanations for it.
We have a follow-up from April, and actually we have a lot of questions, but I'm going to skip to this since we're on the topic. This is from April. So what does a real orb look like?
Well, again, I've only seen about maybe 3 orbs or 4 orbs maybe in 30 years that I can say might have been. Not saying that there aren't more out there. It just never has come to my attention. Again, kind of the same aspects I just talked about. I mean, if you're taking a picture and say you're taking it under low light conditions and you don't want to use a flash, and I always tell people sometimes flash is not good, because flash, if there's a lot of material in the air, fibrous material, it'll light it up like a whole swarm of orbs. So if you can take it without taking the flash, and even my cell phone camera, which is actually a better camera than some of my other 35 millimeters, I mean my digitals, because of the megapixel capability, if you can take it under low light conditions, then you better chances of not getting a whole slew of orbs. And you can also then, if the orb itself has its own luminosity, that's one thing you look for, is a self-sustaining orb that has its own luminosity. That's illuminating the environment around it. Or if you see an orb like that, that would be another way to differentiate between a dust particle and that. Obviously, the eyes can play tricks on you, but in the most part, our eyes are better than any cameras in the market, because basically we taken video where a 35 millimeter camera or a digital freezes a moment of time and space. And that's why sometimes you'll say, well, my eyes didn't see the image, but the camera captured it, because the camera is actually able to freeze that fraction of a second faster than we can blink our eye, perhaps. And in that fraction of a second, something might appear.
That makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. So let's get to some of these other questions. We have a lot of them, actually. With your experience, I know people really want to pick your brain. So Rebecca Gardner is wondering if you've ever experienced a crawler.
A crawler. Actually, I have a couple of times. In fact, actually 3 times here very recently. One was at the Haunted Hour Theater in Elburn, Illinois. There was a report. I don't know if anybody knows Robin Terry, a very interesting guy. He owns Ashmore Estates. He owns the Rhodes Hotel, and he also owns the Haunted Hour Theater. So he has 3 haunted venues. As we were sitting in the green room, or even before that, he kind of gave us a tour, and he said, though, there's this kind of crawly, snaky, wormy material that's been seen in the hallway from time to time. I said, okay. Not that I've come across it that often, but I have heard about it. And so we're all sitting in the green room, basically just step away from this hallway, and we were using an ovilus. And knows what an ovilus is, basically. It's a real-time EVP device, and if you use it in the dictionary mode, there's about 4,200 and some odd words, very common to English language. And if you ask the question, the spirits are supposed to, in theory, manipulate the device and pull out the appropriate response. We had just turned it on, and the first word that came out of 4,280 some words was worm.
Interesting.
And I go, whoa. I said, he just said something about a worm. There was another time where there was also some sort of snaky material. In fact, just recently we were at Old St. Joseph's Hospital in Lorain, Ohio. And in the ER, there was reports of people seeing kind of like a black, snaky, slithery type thing on the ground. Now, the story is kind of interesting. To make a long story short, there was a man who actually was killed on a motorcycle accident who had a snake tattoo on his arm.
Right.
And they just nicknamed this guy that comes through every now and then on EVP. They call him Snake. So whether or not sometimes he shows up as a snake to let people know that that's who it is that you're communicating with, I don't know. But there's been a couple of things that I've come across, and maybe one other that I'm forgetting, but I know 2 or 3 that I've heard about.
Let me ask you, Dale, real quick. I apologize because I was trying to read through the chat there, and I missed a little bit of what you said. When you were talking about the worm situation, did you say y'all were using an app?
Yeah, no, we were using a device called an ovilus. It's it's an actual physical piece of equipment. They have iOviluses that you can use on your iPhone, but I don't have too much confidence in a lot of the applications. I like using physical pieces of equipment that are because, again, what kind of detection devices are actually in your cell phone? I mean, it actually picks up EMF and so forth. There probably none. But we use this ovilus. It's a real-time EVP device. So when you ask the questions, you can sometimes get an appropriate response. That's in the dictionary mode. The phonetic mode is even more scientific, I believe, because in the phonetic mode, it doesn't use the dictionary capability inside there in the words. It allows the spirits to form their own words using a speech synthesizer and putting vowels and consonants together to make words, and then chaining those words into an entire sentence. And we have had many full sentences come out of there, including once when we were at St. Mary's Hospital in Gary, Indiana, and we were coming up to a top floor of the surgical suite, and somebody made a comment about some boxes of patients' records that were inside there, and the ovilus suddenly spit out the whole sentence, "Get out of here." Very, very clearly. It's on the website if anybody wants to check out the website. We have a lot of our evidence up there of places we've been to Not obviously every single place I've been to is because it would fill up so many
Right.
pages. But again, a lot of the public investigations that we've done to, they're very well-known places.
So, Shana is wondering about your thoughts on the cafe and the Goldenrod Showboat there in Campsville, and also what your opinion about where ghosts and spirits go when their venue is destroyed, like the Goldenrod was just recently destroyed here back in October.
Right. I mean, that's always a shame when anytime you have a haunted venue basically bite to dust. And I when I wrote my book on Windy City Ghosts back in 2000, not knowing that I would have to make several updates just to keep track of all the places that are no longer there. Just here in the Chicagoland area, you often wonder what happens when these places are gone. I mean,
Yeah.
in many cases, what I like to believe is that it's not so much the building, it's the property. It's what you call stigmatized property. It's an area where something has happened on the property. It may have been before there was a house there, or an apartment, or a condo, or restaurant, or whatever the case might be. It might date back to an Indian skirmish, a Civil War skirmish, something Revolutionary War, a murder, something that took place before there was anything there. So just because the building's gone, I don't think it necessarily means the spirits are going to go. They might stay right there, and then when a new building is finally built, they just kind of just move right in. That's my belief, because there's been lots of locations that have changed venues, completely tore down, put up a new one, and it's still as haunted as hell. Just like the Showboat, unfortunately, I was there one time to investigate it before it was no longer there, and I'm so glad we got the opportunity to go there. We got some very interesting stuff. It was our first riverboat that we ever investigated. Hopefully not the last.
Yeah, and that was a fantastic location. I loved investigating there, so it's dearly, dearly missed. So from, let's see, we actually have a couple. This is two that are very similar, so I'll go ahead and take care of those. So from Dawn, paranormally speaking, what frightens you the most? And from John Cleaver, what's your scariest investigation?
Well, I guess I probably should start by saying not too many things frighten me. Because
You've been doing this a while. Yeah.
I've been doing this so often, it's kind of old hat. But you know, there are some locations and some things that happen that are spontaneous. That when I research an area, when you talk to people who investigated it, the hauntings, the history, you kind of have an idea what's going on at these locations before you get there, so you know what to expect, perhaps. But sometimes there are things that happen that are unexpected. One example, we were doing a private home for a documentary called Real Ghost Hunters for the Discovery Channel. And we didn't give the location out because it was a private home, but it was in Chicago, west side of Chicago. And the producers of the show were just there to pretty much see how we set up an investigation, how we collect evidence. And if something happened, well, that was a bonus. And sure enough, as we got everything set up and everything was quiet, and they turned the air conditioning off, they turned the fans off, they were very quiet. They had sound equipment that was very sensitive to hearing hums in the background, so everything had to be turned off. We were sweltering because it was getting to be like 70, 80, 90 degrees inside this building. Suddenly, we started hearing footsteps go up and down the hallway directly overhead. Now, we have cameras upstairs in the hallways and in the bedrooms. There's nobody up there. The cat and dog was downstairs. And now you hear what sounds like shuffling of feet. Now, what's even more amazing, it was something I discovered when I reviewed the video. The video that was facing into the camera where Danica had, this was the woman who was living in the home, Danica Faye. I could say her name because she gave her name under the program. She said that she often would felt somebody screaming in her ear, grabbing her feet, a male figure in a blue uniform appearing in her door jamb in the middle of the night, just kind of leaning against her door jamb. That hallway and that room, we had a camera facing in because that was a hot spot. And we heard these sounds when we played back the videotape. You could hear the sounds in the background. Nobody's upstairs. There's big crashes and shuffling of feet. And every time was a crash, the drapes moved back and forth by themselves.
Wow.
Now, all the windows were closed upstairs because they didn't want any external noise getting into the building. So I go, I couldn't explain that. How could you hear a bang and then the drapes just fly over? And you can see it on the website. It's just pretty amazing stuff. The female producer of the show, if you're able to locate that documentary, I think I might have it somewhere. If not, I'll maybe post it on Facebook one of these days. You hear her in the background. She goes, Dale, what's going on? I said, well, I don't know, because this was news to us. Even the owners didn't experience anything like that. So things that happen that are unexpected, sure. I mean, they can send the hair on the back of your neck up a little bit because you're not expecting it. But that's what I live for. I live for that moment to get that little bit of adrenaline rush when I'm at locations, because if it wasn't, it would just be a very dull time.
Right. For sure.
That's one thing that I've noticed, is that the most extreme situations tend to happen at private residences.
Yeah.
That's been my experience, and I think it's fueled by the emotions of those that live there day in and day out. And it's almost as if their fear of what they're experiencing becomes embedded in the walls, and whatever is there kind of thrives on it a little bit, especially if it's volatile. Has that been your experience with what you've come across?
Yeah, or put it this way, or really any location where there are people in the mix there all the time. Okay, whether it be people who live in private homes, or in some cases tour guides at these buildings that are the same tour guides day in and day out, year in and year out, and they're like part of the family according to the spirits, because they're there all the time. They interact with them. They know who they are. They recognize them. So a lot of times they interact with them, and you get a lot of interactions at places that the tour guides are there for an extended period of time.
Yeah, this question here kind of plays into all of that. It's from Phoenix Feather. Have you ever been to a less known haunted place and got more evidence than a popular haunted location?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There have been several times, probably many times, I should say, where a location is not overly advertised as being the most haunted house in Louisiana, the most haunted house in Missouri, or whatever. And these lesser known places, which I come across all the time because people are constantly sending me invites or sending me information, or I'm doing research all the time to try to find interesting places to go that are not so well publicized, is very often some of these smaller places. Sometimes you get as much, if not more, evidence. We got a crazy thing. We're going back. In fact, when we come down to Alton in June, part of our thing is we're going to be spending a day over in Missouri at the Theater Guild in Webster Grove, Missouri. There's a small little theater out there. We were out there before, and we actually had set up a Van de Graaff generator, which produces a tremendous amount of static electricity in the air, which I believe is that spirits can harness that energy to manifest in physical form or through EVPs. And we got, if you listen to that, it's on the website, Theater Guild, Webster Grove, Missouri. You can actually hear in the background, over the noise of the Van de Graaff generator, a raspy female voice asking 3 times, "Help me!
Oh, wow.
Help me!" And it's just amazing. And it's the first time we used it, and we've only used it one at a time. Never got those kind of results. So, I'm going to be bringing that device back when I go back there again for a follow-up.
Yeah, I have a question here from Megan Talbert, and she's wondering. You mentioned that. What's your favorite tool or piece of equipment to research with?
That's interesting. I mean, I have several interesting tools, but I think the one that we get the most results from in the past have been the Ovilus. The Ovilus that's produced by Digital Dowsing, Bill Chappell. He's been doing it for a number of years now, producing high-quality experimental tools. The Ovilus that I use is the PX and the X. They're older versions of the Ovilus, but in my opinion, probably the most accurate, in my opinion, the best Ovilus ever made. I was not really, without bashing Bill, which I don't like to do, but some of the newer ones I just don't like as much as the older ones. I really do. Get a lot of interesting stuff on there. Now, another piece of equipment we recently got is called a XCAM SLS system, structured light sensor. It's a Connect system where it sends out beams of light, little dots, very compact together, and if something shows up that we don't see in the matrix of this invisible mesh you throw out, it shows up as a stick figure. And we've gotten some stick figures, not so much always on the doors, on walls, on beams, but in the middle of doorways when there's nothing there to reflect or to make a matrix.
Now, have you used the same? It's similar to that. It's the laser that sends out a pattern on the wall that is, when they work correctly and when you don't lose power because shit's sucking stuff dry, it is one of the best for capturing shadow figures or anything that is wanting to block out light. Have you had much success with that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I haven't had much success with it. We started to use some laser grids, and we got a new laser grid here recently, which is it's actually a grid. Instead of being a bunch of dots, it's actually a grid, little squares, and it sends it out like 180 degrees directly out in front of you in a little patterns of little blocks. And so far we haven't had much success with that, but we have used shadow detectors, which we've had success with. Now, shadow detectors obviously is you're putting either you're sending a beam of light back to the detector, whether it be IR light or visible light, and again, if something gets in the way that blocks the beam, it alerts the system right away.
I'm learning something new every day. I don't know about none of this stuff.
Well, this is a lot of equipment. If you go to our website, we actually have a whole page of the equipment that we use called GRS equipment, so you can actually see ones that I recommend, ones I tell people maybe to stay away from, and even where you can get it and how much it costs, and how to, sometimes you have to, some of these devices are adaptable. In other words, they have other purposes, and some of the newer devices obviously were built specifically for ghost research.
Yeah, I know you'll be talking quite a bit about the equipment that you use, and of course investigations that you've performed at the Paracon in Alton here coming up. So people will be able to pick your brain there too. From Jocelyn in the Philippines, what do you do if a spirit follows you home?
Well, that's a good question. Usually my wife encounters it and gets awful mad at me. It's happened a few times here, unfortunately. I mean, she really doesn't want to see these things or interact with them or hear them or whatever. We've had numerous experiences that my wife has had here in this home. Sometimes in fact, one year, very brief story. We were doing an investigation down in Campsville in the area, not too far from the Goldenrod, at Summit Grove Cemetery, which is supposed to be a little cemetery haunted by a little girl. And we didn't get nothing. We got no EVPs, nothing at all. We got some strange horse sounds in the background, but nothing. It was kind of creepy, but nothing. It was actually very unnatural sound. It wasn't until the next day, my wife, because at that time I didn't know I had a sleep apnea problem. I used to snore terribly, so she went upstairs to get some sleep and get away from me. And in the morning, when she got up, she saw, she looked across the hallway. There's another bedroom, and in the mirror there was a face in the mirror of a girl, and she jumped up right away, and right away it was just gone, just like that. And she said, "Well, maybe it wasn't in the other room. Maybe it was actually reflected in the mirror and was actually looking over me in the bed in the room that I was in." And that's when she really got scared. She jumped up, and when I got up later that day, she said, "What were you guys doing last night?" I said, "We were investigating the ghost of a little girl at Summit Grove Cemetery." She goes, "That's what I saw." Now, wow. I would have seen that. She didn't really wish that she saw that, but occasionally these things do follow us home. But I always tell people if you have an attachment of some kind, it doesn't have to even be a negative attachment. Most times it's not even negative. They're just curious. They just follow you because you're talking with them.
And they're just checking you out. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you want them to leave and you don't want them around, the first thing you don't want to do is converse with them and talk with them. Just ignore them. Like if you guys were talking to me and I wasn't answering, and I was ignoring you, you'd probably hang up, right? The same thing with the ghosts, basically. If you just ignore them, they're eventually going to go away, and they'll just move back to where they were.
Yeah. We have two questions here that kind of go hand in hand from Betty and Wayne Lengy. Let me grab them here real quick. So, how many investigators are on your team, and how would you recommend going about finding a group?
Well, currently I think we have about 20 people in our group right now. We meet, we have bi-monthly meetings in the basement of my home. I have a big, large area for meeting room set up here. We do an average of about between 15 and 20 investigations a year. That's just in the summer months, and if we have extra time during the winter, if it's really not too bad, we can get past the Chicago winter. We do some things in the winter, mostly indoors. As far as finding a group, again, what I normally suggest is just look at the credentials of the group that you're interested in, especially if you're in a specific area. I get calls and emails from people all the time saying, "I live in Kokomo, Indiana. What's close to? You got a paranormal group I could join over there?" And a lot of times, I can look in my database and I can find a group. I can't always vouch for how good they are, but I can say, "Well, here's a group here." But you always want to look into, first of all, how long the group's been around, see how long the people have been involved in research, how many places they've went, what kind of equipment they use, what kind of evidence they've collected. Sometimes they have protocols, methodology on their website. They might even have some sort of bylaws. Read into them, and you'll be able to get a pretty good understanding of what the group's all about. And especially if there are a lot of YouTube videos. Now, YouTube videos doesn't always make it good for being a paranormal investigator, but at least you'll be able to see how they actually investigate through YouTube videos. So I would hope that they're not just, like some of these reality TV shows, which I won't mention, that they're just playing around on these YouTube videos, that they're actually out there investigating, which I'm sure they probably are, because we do Facebook Live videos all the time. But that would be a good way of checking out the credibility of a group if you wanted to get involved.
All right. Well, you know what? We are actually a little bit past our hour.
Every time we're going to have to start
time goes by so fast.
It does. It flies by, and guys, I'm sorry. I know you had a lot of other questions, but we are going to have to cut it off here. We do have another show coming up, and we need to let Dale get to the rest of his evening. So,
come to the Paracon.
Come to the Paracon, yes. The Haunted Road Media Paracon. Dale will be speaking on all these different things that he was talking about this evening. So it's going to be a great time. And, you'll have a table and everything there set up to Dale, so people can come pick your brain even when you're not speaking. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So definitely come on out. That's June 9th from 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. And then we have a paranormal investigation that evening. You can check out hauntedroadmedia.com for all that information. And Dale, how can people find you?
Well, they can find me various ways through my website at www.ghostresearch.org, ghostresearch.org. I also have a Facebook page. They can look for me just under my name or under Ghost Research Society as well. So there's a number of ways you can get a hold of me, or you can if you want to send me an email, you can send it to Dale@ghostresearch.org.
All right, fantastic.
They loved you, Dale, by the way.
They did. All kinds of great things are said about you down there.
On.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do some shout-outs here real quick, guys, and then we'll kick it over to Inside the Upside Down, in which we will be talking about ancient origins. So Super Chat Superstars, BD Flint, Tom McNicholas, and Robert White, who had an Australian, I think I forgot to mention, he had an Australian $5 Super Chat. I do think I forgot to mention that, and I apologize. So let's get to the shout-outs real quick. Of course, Shana, our chat Shananigator, thank you for shenanigating the chat. And then Donna Gorton, our Cheshire Cat that's down there this evening, thank you very much as well. So April Wimigwans, thank you very much for being here this evening. Spooky Dawn, thank you as well. Pamela Rainey, thanks for joining us again. Rebecca Gardner, thank you, and thank you for the kind thing that you said. I did see that. Candy Orton, thank you for joining us again. Beyond the Light Network, of course, we're simulcasting there, so I don't know if was Shay in here this evening, and Chuck Banks as well. Robin Gaffner, thank you. And again, I apologize, guys, for not getting to all the questions. Catherine H., thank you as well. Phoenix Feather, thanks for all the questions. And let's see, Andrew Cox. We had a lot of people in chat this evening. Judy Wilson. Yeah. Let's see, Betty and Wayne Lange. We'll see you at the Paracon as well. Fungi, back this evening. Chanel F., thanks for joining us tonight. We had some new faces in the house. Tim Schoen, thank you very much. As usual, Real Paranormal Activity, the podcast. Tim. Yeah, and Tim, hope you do feel better. Real Paranormal Activity, the podcast. Diane Hilbert, there you are. Rachel Rodbell, hey, thanks for joining us tonight. Megan Talbert was in there as well tonight. Joe Chandler, she got her ghosty. Mickey Dole, thanks again. Zippy Davis, of course. Who else do we have here? And if I miss anybody, I do apologize. There's a lot of you in the chat tonight. Chipper Terry. And I think I will leave it at that. John Cleaver. John Cleaver was around tonight. And yeah, all right.
We love y'all.
Yes, we do. Let me scroll back down, see if there's anybody else that popped in here. And see Dave Harding. Thank you. There's Tom McNicholas, and all right, I think that is going to do it. Again, if I miss you, it's nothing personal, just a lot of you in the chat tonight. So we have Inside the Upside Down coming up next, talking about ancient origins. And Dale, again, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Do appreciate it, and we'll see you.
My pleasure.
Meeting you, Dale.
Yep, we'll see
anytime.
We'll see you in about a week and a half.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.